Yeah, thank you, Susan, and thanks a lot. And I welcome you all, like all the participants across the nations, for joining us today in our IIRSM India branch. I'd like to welcome our speaker, Mr. Norman Smith. And he has like very vast experience and very like senior in the industries. Like he started fellow of IOSH and fellow members of IIRSM. And overall, like in his careers, he has worked in various functionals over the different industries, navigating from like oil and gases at the initial early phases in the merchant navy, and then oil and gases, and now in Subsea 7. And like I'm also lucky by being mentoring him. He's my mentor also as well currently. And definitely, before handing over to him, I will just like to update you about IIRSM India branch. Like next month, we are planning to have again 2 webinars on different topics, and the informations and other thing will be intimated to you via LinkedIn post and personal email to all your email IDs, all the registered members. And beside this, we are planning to organize like on-site discussion, table around discussion in HSE. The information about the short discussion into HSE will be intimated to you as well via different mediums communications. And that's it from the branch updates. And I would like to hand over to you, Norman sir, and all the best. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Mohit. I'll just switch my webcam off so we can see the screens. So first of all, good evening to all of the IIRSM members that are in India, and I really would like to thank you today for giving me this this honor, this privilege to be able to address you and to talk about the subject that is very current in my involvement, but also one that's a very large subject. And so there are lots of issues, lots of trains of thought, lots of different ideas. So what I'm going to present now is my understanding of the topic as a safety practitioner. I'm not an academic, I'm not a psychologist, and so this is how I see it in terms of the operational impact for me and my organization at the moment. I'd really like to go through this in 4 little steps. A quick introduction. I would like to then cover the background of the subject and then take a little bit of a look at HOP itself, and then finish up with some conclusions and some views. Some are personal and some are critiques from some of the different protagonists. So to start with an introduction, and Mohit very kindly covered some of this, but that's me on a page. That's me from when I started work at 16 and to where I am now. And I very fortunately have been able to work in Marine. I was a navigation officer, chief officer. And then when the fleet was cancelled, I moved into offshore oil and gas in the North Sea, then into drilling, then into well services, then into subsea engineering, and back in subsea engineering now. And I was very lucky to have a fantastic 2 years as the national director for Royal Mail, where I learned a lot more safety than I expected to. So that's my background. This is what Subsea 7 does, anything under the water. So we lay pipes, we do tiebacks, we do renewables, floating wind, diving, pipe lay, tiebacks, anything that happens under the water to do with engineering is what we do. And we do it on a global basis. We have about 80 different nationalities in the organization and about 12,000 employees. So quite complicated. And this is the kit that we use to do the job. So you can see that we've got a very sophisticated fleet of vessels, from heavy lift to pipe lay to walk to work to renewable cable lay. We've got lots of remote autonomous vehicles. So that yellow one you can see, 2 down, 2 in. That's almost like an underwater robot, can go down and open valves and do all sorts of things for us. We also construct things, and we make lots of pipe. In fact, we make a type of pipe called a bundle, where you have a pipe and lots of pipes inside it. Interesting thing, if you look at the picture 2 down far right, is one of our bundle yards, and we make them 7 kilometers long, then tow them out to sea and put them into position. So we have a lot of capable, competent people. And as you can see, you know, it's beginning to build up. And this is where we work. We work globally. Now, I know a lot of presenters always do this at the beginning because they want to sell their organization. But in this case, I'm not trying to sell Subsea 7 to you guys, not in any way. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture of why HOP is so important to us. If you look at the complexity of the operations we conduct, the equipment we use, the influence of the people within the organization, the capabilities and competencies we need, then it kind of makes sense that we look at human and organizational performance from a very practical aspect, because we do have a very complicated risk profile which we need to manage. So if I think about human and organizational performance, and I'll keep calling it HOP because it will save some time and it's what most people say anyway, this is how I understand it. So a little look at the background, how the occupational health and safety focus has evolved, kind of look a little bit at the history of it. And the interesting thing for me is this evolvement has happened through my whole career. So since 1972 through, we've been able to see how we've moved towards this. Then we'll take a look at HOP generally, look at the principles from Mr. Conklin, but also to look at, you know, effective management of HOP, and then some contrasting views and feedback just to finish up. What makes this an interesting subject, or perhaps a difficult subject for people, is that the principal influences that have generated us towards HOP really have a lot of similarities, and they have a lot of similar values and beliefs, and they confuse it even more by sometimes working together. So I have put at the end of the presentation some thumbnails on each of the main influences and their publications, and how HOP all comes together. It took me quite some time, and I'm not sure I have it perfectly right yet. So that's how I'd like to approach this. So let's start with a little bit of background. Because we're in IIRSM, risk management is our focus, absolutely our focus, and all aspects of risk. And it's good to see that the institution is becoming more focused on financial, reputational, business risk, because risk is risk. But when I look at it from a health and safety perspective, which is my focus, there are 3 real things that actually lead to loss or damage or injury. And it's when we can't control energy, the transfer of energy. So again, you know, it's something that we know if electrical discharges, mooring ropes snap, explosions. The movement of mass, so we have ship collisions, vehicle collisions, perhaps we have dropped objects. And the one that we see increasingly as the thing we need to control is the transmission of information. And that transmission of information, as we become more digital and we also become more automated and we become more real time, and we try a lot more remote operations, it becomes more and more critical. The thing that I use this slide for is to really make a point that although we really do appreciate these are the things we need to control to prevent loss, there's always been this understanding, certainly since the early 70s, that the reason these are a problem are because of people. It's because people did something wrong in the transfer of the energy. People dropped the object. People provided the information incorrectly. And over time, we've begun to understand that that's not true. And I mean, if we look at the consequence paths, we're always looking as safety practitioners to find a silver bullet. And of course, there isn't one. There isn't a way that we can simply manage risk effectively for all situations and for all people. So risk management is at the core of HOP. Whatever else anybody thinks about the socio-technical sides of it, it's about risk management, pure and simple. If we look at it, the primary objective of myself and all of the other safety practitioners on this call has always been to keep everybody safe and healthy. Absolutely. And we do that through effectively managing risk. And to get there, we've been guided by a succession of influences, a lot of academics and practitioners who have looked at the situation and tried to put forward models and approaches that we can all use. And most safety practitioners in particular, they read a lot, they try and understand, and we try and glean from each of these experts, these subject matter experts, on how we can do it. If you look at that lineup, it matches my own. Obviously, they all have the safety practitioner's hairstyle, but more importantly, they are all from Europe or the West. They're from America, Europe, or one's Australian. And the models that they've developed were for the time that they developed them. And so depending if the countries or the companies were industrial and still industrializing, post-industrial, the new place of work, new ways of work, the models have moved to try and reflect those. And I think that's a very important point, because just because HOP is top of the agenda for some organizations in some parts of the world, perhaps it isn't for everybody, and perhaps only some of it is. But when I look at this picture, it's the history of me at work, except for the guy furthest to the left, Heinrich, who was back in the 1930s. He wrote the first ever book, Industrial Accident Prevention. I still have a copy at home. He was a real forward thinker. Unfortunately, he blamed everything on people. It was because of people's social environment, their ancestry, their lack of education, and the poor conditions that they lived under, that accidents happened. And in the 1930s, with the world's depression, lack of work, and the general malaise of the world, then his theory didn't sound too bad. But as you move left to right, you can see Frank Bird, Rasmussen, Reason, Woods, Holnagel, Decker, and Conklin. So those 8 individuals have been the biggest influence on me. And if I can briefly explain how that comes together, if you look at the early learning, and when I started as a safety practitioner in the 70s, the domino model from Heinrich was beginning to be pushed to the side, because Bird had really worked out that, humans are still a hazard to be controlled. He didn't change his mind on that. What he did say for the first time was, really, it isn't about people and where they come from and their social status. It's about the management system. And from that management system, we can take a look and start to see that perhaps what was really happening was that we didn't set people up to succeed. It was obviously one of the issues. And then round about the early 70s, when I started work, ICI, the chemical company, the global chemical company, started using something called bow ties, which, both the bow ties, we're still using them. I did one yesterday. So we were beginning to think a little bit differently. And in the near 80s, Bird decided he would update that the domino model and put in the fault of management. And then we started to get a real concentration from the mid 80s onwards of really deep thinking people that could see things slightly different. So Rasmussen started to look at human machine interface and the fact that we use adaptive processes to try and work with machines. And he worked very closely with the others that you can see there, Holnagel and Woods, and they got some really good concepts like cognitive system engineering. You can't look at people on their own. You must look at them in the context of where they're working in the machines they're using. James Reason, the Swiss cheese model, the chap you can see at the top, he really looked at it from a different way. He was a little bit more taxonomic in his approach. He tried to say, look, the reason we have problems is because of errors, slips, lapses, and violations. And they happen because people make those mistakes, errors, and slips. So let's put some barriers in place that will stop those errors actually causing the hazard to be realized. So let's put some things in the way. And he built his Swiss cheese model, which is still relevant today. It is probably a little bit dated, but it still works. But he was kind of outside the main body of the Kirk, and that was really around resilience engineering. And we had some really good practitioners there. Holnagel and Woods, you can see there, they built their joint cognitive system, which was really good. They really built resilience engineering. And Woods is very famous for something called his theory of graceful extensibility, A lot of words, sounds complicated, but what he really says is a system is good if it can adapt to changes and unexpected events. And the extension from that was, well, then we need people also to be resilient and have the capacity to also react. Later on, Decker came in at the bottom, you can see Sidney Decker, and he started to say, well, hold on a minute. Human error is the old view, is the cause of many accidents. It's errors that cause accidents. So that was the old view. His view was said, look, human error is a symptom. He said, why are people making mistakes? Why are people making a slip? Why is it happening? And he said, well, really, it's only a symptom. And what it gives you is a signal that there's something deeper in the system that isn't working. And so Sidney Decker and Holnagel started working together. They all ended up co-authoring different books. And the one most recent to the party is the one to the furthest right, Mr. Conklin. And he brought up his pre-accident investigation. He decided, and it's something we do when we do emergency exercises, it's something we do with risk assessments. His idea was, let's build an accident and then work backwards and deconstruct to the cause, rather than the other way of building up information to decide what the cause was. And that made a great step forward. And he talked a lot about learning teams and getting information from the front line. And he introduced the 5 principles of HOP that we'll talk about later on. Now, there are lots more people involved in this chronology, but I have put details about these at the back of my presentation that you'll be able to look at. And that's a very short snapshot for a lot of things that were going on. I didn't think you wanted 20 slides on that, so let's move on. So let's look at HOP generally. I managed to pick up about a dozen definitions of HOP while I was preparing to give this paper. And there was one paper I read which had 4, and I quite liked it because I know when I've used these in the past, each of these resonate with different groups. So in very simple terms, and I think it was mentioned in the flyer, that HOP is really a cross between system design and psychology. So system design, the tools and processes and equipment that we use at work, but then to tie in the psychological aspects of people, and not the psychology of thinking of people being machines or being systems, but about being people. And that was a good step forward. If you look at the new view, and the new view is a term that you'll hear a lot, and new view and HOP is pretty much interchangeable. The new view is often preferred because it covers all of the different aspects. But from a new view, HOP is seen as a global movement towards the social sciences and building resilient systems. So that again is quite good. So yeah, social sciences, how people and groups of people operate, and resilient systems to allow them to operate safely within. So again, makes sense. If we look at the third definition, the engineering perspective, the data analysis one, then you could say humans make errors, break rules with a known frequency. And that is affected by human influence and factors. So we don't just do things in a vacuum. There are triggers and influences that drive our behavior. But if we take these data inputs as a given, we can actually design better systems with improved rules and better methods of control and discipline. So again, from an engineering perspective, you can explain HOP reasonably clearly. And if we want to actually be really soft, so we're trying to convince people a little bit about HOP, what we can say is, look, we all as human beings have biases, shortcuts that help us to make decisions in our brain with all the information that's flying around. And it helps us to judge, and it helps us to make decisions. And we believe sometimes, and a big fault that we have, that everybody else has access to all the necessary information, and they also possess full autonomy so they can make their minds up about what they're going to do in decision making, when the reality in life is very few people do. And this misunderstanding is magnified because of this global industrial culture we all work within. So yeah, some people have lots of information, some people have autonomy, but there are huge tracts of the world. You just have to read the ILO recent report where that doesn't exist. And so if it doesn't exist, HOP probably isn't ready for some of those situations. So if we look at the three main protagonists that I'm influenced by, so Sidney Dekker, Eric Holnagel, and Todd Conklin, they're saying, look, this isn't about doing safety different. This is about doing business different. We're not talking here about a process. We're not talking about a machine. We're talking about a cultural, we're talking about a belief system change. We're talking about how we actually perceive work and the people we work with. This isn't a quick fix. This is different. So within these three books, if you read them, and hopefully some of you may have read some of them already, if not all of them, you find some very common kinds of themes. For example, they all believe that we will never eliminate all errors as long as people are involved. Well, I can certainly vouchsafe for that one because I make errors every day. I managed to get down the bottom of my drive this morning without my car keys. So, yep, we do keep making errors. We keep making mistakes. We also know that we're human beings. We're fallible. We make mistakes. There's nothing you can do to change those core facts. There is no such thing as the perfect human being. It doesn't happen. We also have this thing that human error has a connection to other processes, such as process design or organizational expectations. Very simple one. If we have some parts of the world where we have piecework or we have timelines that are unreasonable, so people have to rush and take shortcuts and put themselves at risk, then that isn't the reason for the problem. That is the reason for the problem, not the fact that the person then makes a mistake and hurts themselves. So they all agree on that. The other thing they talk about is that human error, the mistakes we make, the slips we make, are often the reason that we release some issues that already exist in the organization. So there are some dormant, latent type hazards that may have been introduced at the planning stage, maybe a miscalculation, a procedural error, and all of that happened back in the office, the design office, but actually the problem happens in the front line where the guys are actually working. So HOP is seen as a really good thing in terms of, look, if you can get that understanding and then work on it, it's not a quick fix. As I said, it's not a silver bullet, but it certainly is the way forward. Now, there's a couple of tenets in these approaches that are quite fixed as well. So one of them is about developing safer systems of work. And there are a couple of terms, and they're interchangeable. Sometimes they're called work as imagined, and sometimes they're called work as performed. So if you look at it, the work as imagined is all the trouble we go to design task plans, procedures, checklists, risk assessments, permit to work, management to change processes, all of the things that we do that define how we're going to do this work safely and prevent anybody getting hurt or any damage or any loss. That tends to be the view that we share. And in fact, if you really think about risk management or you think about incident investigation, we tend to investigate incidents based on the work as imagined. Did you follow the procedure? Did you do an efficient toolbox talk? Is your permit to work right? Are the isolations clearly identified? The reality is that once work starts to happen, the environment and the situation, the context that the work is happening in changes. And we're really good at managing change. And quite often, a lot of that change can be managed by the workers themselves because they look at situations and they think, I know a better way of doing it. I know an easier way of doing it. Or why are all these steps when we can miss a couple? And the work that is actually performed in the front line varies. Now, if I look at that graphically, if I look at this graph here, if you look at the green line along the top, I start off with the work as imagined, or you can sometimes say work as planned. You can either term. And if I do the job exactly as the procedure, exactly as the task plan tells me, I will follow that green line across and I'll get to the finish and complete my job. But as I said, there are so many factors in terms of people, equipment, materials, environment and process, changes, different influences, and actually the person themselves will be under different influences. They can be distracted, particularly in this recent world with the COVID issues. They can be fatigued, they can be confused, they can be undertrained. So we've got all these variables. And so the actual work that happens starts to drift away from the expected, and you get this drift. And as you can see, it wobbles up and down. Sometimes it goes above the workers imagined. They do even more safety or more steps. Sometimes it's below, but for clarity, I've just left this one below. Now, I said that in the previous one that a lot of our hazards already exist in an organization. So what tends to happen is as the behaviors become more at risk, then things start to happen. We see errors and mistakes creeping in. We start to record near misses. There are more managements of change required. We start to see some precursors like absenteeism or people avoiding certain tasks. And then as it increases, we start to get high potential incidents. And what you can see at the bottom dotted line is those accumulation of hidden hazards will eventually meet the workers performed and we'll have an event, an unwanted event. Now, the thing that I like about HOP is it's about learning. The whole philosophy is we learn from the people doing the work and we take that learning, we put it back into our system. So the work is imagined and the work is performed. We pull that drift, that difference between the two as absolutely close as possible, as close as we can get it so that there isn't any too much of a variance. There's still a little bit of slack there. You can't have robots doing the work unless you put robots in to do it. So I think it's a graphical way of trying to explain, but this work as imagined, work as performed is a very important concept in this subject. Now, there are about 6 HOP factors that are very important. The first thing is to think that human actions, the things we do, the behavior, it isn't wrong, it isn't right. What we do is driven by our perceptions, our attitudes, some very complex thinking process, and most of the time, we deliver what we're asked to do. The outcomes are okay. But when error occurs, then we get mixtures. We get a mix-up in the perceptions, the intentions, the interpretations. We miss something or we get distracted. And then it could be that we end up with a different outcome. So we need to understand that. What we do isn't right or wrong. It's what we do because of the situation we're in. Systems and cultures drive behavior. When we do something, it's usually in response to some kind of process, some pressure, some demands, some requirement. And quite often, most of us want to do a good job. We actually put some perceived pressures on ourselves, but we're driven by that. We don't operate in a vacuum. We just don't go to work and suddenly start deciding we're going to produce something or deliver something. It happens within a system. And the culture of that organization will also influence and drive that behavior. The next thing we look at is we need to think about technical and risk competence, and they're two different things. So if we think about technical competence, that's what we pick up from our skills training, our task procedures, our, if you like, our professional learning. But the risk competence is a little bit different. It refers to your ability to look at situations, identify, judge, and deal with risks. We sometimes call that situational awareness, dynamic risk assessment. There are lots of terms in our trade. But actually what it's talking about is, yep, you learn a lot and you technically can be very gifted, but there's this experiential bit you need to bring in as well so you can identify risk and do something about it. The other thing is that all events are complex and dynamic. Yeah, common accidents such as slips and trips and falls, we usually think they're pretty linear. We kind of know that they keep happening. They're pretty unpreventable, and is it worth spending cost-benefit analysis millions of dollars to prevent somebody tripping? Perhaps, perhaps not. But when we start looking at uncommon events, what we start to see is lots of complexity, lots of randomness, lots of dynamic factors. And it's a bit like the triangles, the old bird triangles, where now we don't look at the lower level events being a precursor to the top end high level events. And we now do something we call mining the diamond, and we look at a different set of criteria because big events are complex and dynamic. Safe work, and this is something that you'll hear from HOP quite regularly, safety isn't the absence of events. So it's not about low lost time injuries, low damage events, low high potential. It's nothing to do with looking at the normal metrics that we tend to look at. It's really about having capacity, having the safeguards and the ability to respond to change. That capacity, so something unusual happens, but you've got enough safeguards, controls, barriers in place for it to be absorbed. And the last one is that we've got to stop talking about safety, well, HSEQ in my opinion, health, safety, environment and quality. They are not standalone things. They are not in a standalone world. They are integrated. They are part of our operational procedures and activities. They are not a separate consideration. So based on those HOP factors, Conklin decided that he would come up with 5 principles, very simple principles, and you'll start to see some repetition. I don't ask for forgiveness because there is a lot of repetition in HOP. So let's have a look at what Mr. Conklin said. Well-known 5 principles. So again, like I've already iterated, Conklin says that humans are fallible. Everybody makes mistakes, regardless of your experience, your age, your knowledge, academic prowess, seniority in the organization. Doesn't matter. Mistakes are natural, and they shouldn't trigger judgment. That humans are inseparable from the system in which they work. So don't keep looking at the human as the problem. Look at the system and work environment that they're having to perform within. So I think it's a good principle. The second one is that behaviors are influenced by context. So what any of us do, myself included, it actually makes sense to them at the time. So based on the knowledge you have, the perception, the things that are going on around you, the influences from your manager, your peers, your family, the way that you're feeling, what you do, what you decide to do actually makes sense to you at the time. And so the behavior of individuals are shaped by their context. And this is a really important message because, if we try and blame people and give them a hard time for making a mistake, which, let's be honest, is something they didn't want to do in the first place, we're really missing a trick. We're actually demonstrating we don't understand. If we look at the third principle, failure likely situations are predictable and so they're manageable. So we know through leading indicator information, we know through hypos, we know there are certain things we do, working at height, working in confined spaces, using chemicals, radioactive sources. There are things that we know and operations that we conduct that are likely to lead to some unwanted situations, but we know them, we recognize them, and we can manage those risks. That it's possible, it's not difficult. Negative events can be avoided by learning from successes and failures. That principle to me is one that rings most to me in my career because I think front-end risk management, we've been really good. So we do all the paperwork, we do all the training, we do all the checks and balances, self-verification, verification of effectiveness, audits, inspections, checks. We go the full 9 yards. The bit that we've never been good at, in my opinion, in all the organizations I've worked for, is that we don't capture the learning. We don't debrief at the end of tasks properly. We don't capture the actual operational learning. And as I go towards my retirement soon, I keep thinking there are thousands of lessons I haven't learned because we haven't done the last bit, which is, okay, you've had a good day, you've just had 12 hours running pipe at 400 meters, 30-inch pipeline. Okay, what went right, what went wrong? We just haven't been very good at it. And we always try and learn from negative events, but actually, and certainly from some of the protagonists, you actually learn just as much from looking at what went right. If you look at safety differently, that's exactly what they're saying. Focus on the 99% of things that go right and forget about the things that go wrong, because eventually, if you keep getting the things right better and improve that quality assurance, then you'll avoid. And finally, leaders' responses to failures and successes affects future performance. Now, this is in the aspect of health and safety, but anybody that does anything, if they get at least a fair listening, a just listening, where people respond by saying, okay, yep, that's gone wrong, but is everybody okay? Right, let's get the situation fixed and let's look at what we can learn to prevent this again. Instead of screaming, shouting, blaming, trying to categorize the incident a different way so it doesn't affect the stats, being aggressive. Really, good leaders look at when things go wrong as an opportunity. It's very easy to say that, and I'm fortunate to have a really good leadership team that actually work that way. My executive are really switched on. But those 5 principles are pretty much the ones that are bandied around. We see in magazines, we see in articles, we see on Google and everywhere else. So they're the 5 principles. I like them. I work to them. But when I start looking at how we then manage those, I kind of started adding a few more slides. So when you actually think about managing HOP now, so we know what the principles are, I think there are 7 things that you really need to think about if you really are serious about getting this into your organization. The first one, I think, is something that should be there anyway. It's not about HOP. It's about us as human beings. You know, people have dignity. Everybody on this planet wants to be treated with a little bit of respect, fairness, and a little bit of honesty. You know, and if you have those things in an organization, and if you have those things in life with your friends and family, then you're going to build trust. You build trust, you improve communication. You improve communication, you find out more about what's going on. And in today's world, people do not get a job in an organization unless they're needed. Everybody is part of the organization. Everybody contributes to that risk management. It's so important. People are not objects. They're not a static component that we have in the company, like ordering up some filters. They're an active contributor, and everybody has that ability, and it's so important. Excuse me. Relationships are really integral to open communication. And when I look at this, I always think to myself, you know, of all the legislation I've had to learn in my life, there isn't one against dignity and respect. It's something that should be a given in whatever we do. And I believe that strongly. We've said this one already. People are fallible. It's normal to make mistakes. It's a permanent, intrinsic feature of being human beings. So why all of us are going to be on this planet and making our contribution, we are going to make mistakes. It's in there for good. It's not going to go away. We can't eliminate it. On the counter to that, I do have to say that people are also brilliant. People have a wide range of capabilities. They're able to adapt and improvise. They deal with the things they're dealt. Excuse me. If they've got inadequate resources, they've had weak training, they've got poor tools to work with, the schedule isn't right, there's process shortfalls, they adapt, they get through and get the work done. And it's essential that we assume that people will make mistakes, but also to remember, error is never the cause of an event. That mistake isn't the cause of that event. It's something that contributed to it, but it's not the underlying or the root cause. It's something that was towards it. The next one was that people don't come to work to fail. I certainly haven't in the last 50 years. Most people want to do a good job. Error, when we make them, isn't a choice. Unless we're going to cause a violation to do something really nasty and we're doing it on purpose, error isn't a choice, it's unintentional. Only time it seems to ever be a choice is when we do an incident investigation and we look backwards and say, well, that guy made a mistake. Why? It's not a choice. People want to get it right. But we will take shortcuts. If we can see the benefits that we get from taking a shortcut outweigh the costs, we certainly will. And then the thing that's really important is remember that when we blame people, it's very emotional, it's very personal. And actually what we should be looking at is how we address the system. Errors are predictable and manageable. I've said this before. That image is the 9 life-saving rules that we work to from the Institute of Oil and Gas Producers. If you look at it, we've got probably the 9 hazards. They're certainly the most prevalent ones causing fatalities in the oil and gas industry where I live. And we can predict. We know the things that we're going to do. We know the hazards that are involved. We know the levels of risk that are going to be involved. And if that's the case, then we can manage them. Risk is an inherent dynamic in the way we operate. So when work is carried out, we have to use sources of energy, tools, material to get that work done. So there are built-in hazards in the fact that we're doing something. It's there. And it exists within every organization because of what we do. The larger and more complex the organization, the risk becomes increasingly dynamic, and the organizations have to be designed, constructed, and operated in a way that we can manage that. So if I go back to my first 3 or 4 slides when I showed you all those lovely color pictures of the world that I work in, it really wasn't to sell Subsea 7. It was to underpin this, which is organizations are complex, so solutions have to be equally agile as well. that you don't have one thing fix all. This is the one I love best because organizations are tuned to get the results they are getting. I'm always amazed when the board or the executive or the senior management say, what are we going to do about this safety performance, Norman? It's not right. And you have to explain to them, hey guys, you're getting the performance that you want. You are the leadership, you are the influence. If you wanted to improve, I need more resources, I need more money, I need more time, I need more subject matter experts. And it's the same for production. You know, organizations are getting the performance they've designed or built themselves or are managing themselves to achieve. Same with safety, same with quality. And as I said, you know, work is done within the context of the management system, the technology, the corporate and societal pressures, the work group cultures. You know, there's a lot of complex interrelationships. But when a company complains about its performance, it always has to understand that it's getting the performance that it's generated. And finally, a bit of caution here, but the cause of tomorrow events exist today. So the conditions necessary to cause harm are already in your company. They're in your organization. They're there. How we control and manage those risks is a completely different thing. But don't think that somebody pushing the wrong button, opening the wrong valve, or getting out of step in the sequence of performing a task is what's causing those events. Those events can't be released if they don't already exist. So we have a really good risk guy that I'm sure a lot of you read, Tony Mashara, talks a lot about error traps. And he talks about these error traps living dormantly, quietly, secretly in organizations. And they're things like procedures that no longer make any sense, insufficient time to do the job, excessive and needless documentation, bureaucracy, incorrect tools, all the things that increase the likelihood of a mistake, they're in your organization now. And that's what we need to go and look and find, and to marry it with the input from individuals. I'm just watching my time, so I'm just going to accelerate a little bit. Thank you. HOP is about managing risk. Absolutely. I'm not going to spend any time on this. But if we're going to adapt properly, we need to make sure that we understand how we think differently about risk, our risk perception, you know, our dynamic risk of awareness, if you like. We need to control critical steps. So if there are controls, safeguards, barriers, call it what you want, they need to be in place, maintained, understood, kept current, really important. And number three is really for the senior management and the executive and the function, really, that you need to keep learning about the systems that are in place and learn from the front line. Very important. We talk in some of those influencers talk about operational learning and learning teams. Really, it's a conversation between those that work and those that design the work. We have a process here called workforce engagement, and it's a way of marrying the two, the people at the front end, the workers performed, and the guys that do the planning, the workers imagined. And it works very effectively. And we can use them in two ways. We use them at the front end of projects or big tasks that we're going to conduct, but we also do them after an event has occurred as part of the investigation team. It's a good way of getting a good perspective of what's going on. It only takes a couple of conversations and a couple of these learning team meetings to just see how effective they are. If I had to pick something in the last 5 years where I think I've picked up most of my learning, it has been at those learning teams. And they actually help you understand where your company is, because I think I know how the work is done. If I can interface with the people that are actually doing the work, I have a better view of how close we've got that workers imagined against workers performed. So it's very important. So just to conclude, and it's been a bit fast, I do apologize. Let's see if we can put some practicality into this. So if I look at HOP, and I've been very positive towards HOP all the way through, I see it as a really useful tool. I don't think it's the silver bullet, but it's a good thing to have in the armory. There is also a lot of counter views around human and organizational performance. Every model that you see, every theory that you pick up, whether it's to do with risk or safety or engineering, you're always going to get counter views. Things change, our understanding improves. Sometimes we evolve, and if you're really clever, you can see that we've been saying the same thing for the last 70 years. But nevertheless, we will have some people that don't agree with what we say. One of the most vociferous is a chap called Mr. Cooper, and in 2020, so a couple of years back now, he had some real concerns. What he said was, look, I like what it says, and it kind of makes sense, but actually there's no published, peer-reviewed empirical evidence. There are no position papers, there are no learned documents. It's all really good theory. It kind of works, and it works in different ways, but actually there is no principles to say that this proposition is even valid. So from an academic, it's like, okay, hop's great, but yeah, prove it. There is nothing granular to tell us that. The other thing that's been said quite a bit is this new view, it's really unclear how it differs from existing solutions, because I hope that in this short talk, lots of you have picked up the fact that a lot of the things I've said HOP is about is where you already are, what you already think. There are some of the values that already exist. And the other one is that there is a fair amount of criticism in that HOP has never really been shown to be absolutely effective in real life situations. But the reason for that, I think, isn't that HOP isn't adding value. What I think is it's not the only thing that's happening in the organization. You're still going through all your risk management techniques. You're still using all your tools and processes. You're still using technically competent people. So to break out one single influence to say that that's what's making the difference is almost impossible. But I put that slide in for no other reason than to say, look, I like HOP, doesn't mean everybody does. And the more you read, the more you'll come across contrasting views. So where are we now? So we're in a very sticky place in 2022. As I say, the last year of me working, and it's probably in a similar mess that it was when I started back in 1972. But we've got all sorts of issues now. We've got the pandemic, completely new ways of working, a very turbulent economy now globally, real resource shortages on people, equipment, and materials. Environmental impacts are far more up the agenda. We're seeing more extreme weather events, political instability, and unfortunately, there's too much conflict around the world. And that little red box is pretty much why IIRSM is here. And we've covered all of those things as articles or focus areas. So that's where we are. But we need to keep developing, and we need to move on from where we are currently. And I don't know what things will look like from 2022 onwards, but I would give this caution, my guidance. So the first thing I would always say is you need to investigate your own organization and find out where you are. You know, this is a journey, but you can't go on a journey till you know your destination and where you're setting off from to start with. So have a look at your company and be really clear then on what you need. What are your concerns? Do you actually need HOP? Maybe, maybe not. Are you ready for it? Identify where you've got these socio-technological or technical risks. Where are the machine-man interface problems or people interface problems? Where are the things that really you can see are happening? Maybe you don't. Take a look internally and see what available resources you actually have. Have you got the available budget? Can you get external support to help you with this? Look at different options for improving the situation. HOP is one bullet in the magazine. It's not the only thing that we've got. And the biggest bit of advice I would say is take the time to think things through. Don't just think, well, HOP sounds like a great idea, let's go for it. Really understand your own organization first. Look at the current solution, which is optimum. Look at some of the principles of HOP. Some bits might work, some might not. So if I look at now for the last couple of slides on what I've done or what we've done in our company, we have been on a HOP journey since January this year. We've been on it this last 7 months. We got a big investigation team together, 4 directors and a vice president. So we took some fairly senior, experienced people that didn't have a lot of time, but we've spent a considerable amount of time on this. We then tried to understand and map what the HOP benefits would be to us as a company. And that took a lot of time. Those first 2 boxes took 3 or 4 months of 5, 6, 7 hours a week. It was a lot of intense work to get to where we are. And then once we thought we understood where we were and what we needed, we traveled to Houston and we visited some really big companies that are really well embedded into HOP. For example, American Airlines, Chevron, and we looked at some smaller companies, and we came away from that with a really good understanding of what HOP is and what it isn't. And we learned some lessons. Some companies have used HOP and have gone so deep, it's now become a bureaucratic nightmare and it's ineffective. Some people are doing it really well on a light touch and it's working really well. So we came back from Houston. We spent the next 2 months redefining what HOP is for us. And we found out a lot of things. And I'll show you what our HOP principles are now. We've got 4. Our 4 HOP principles are that we're going to really try hard to understand our people, the work they do, and how we get to the products we need. We're recognizing how things are actually done, work planned, work performed. The one for us is the bottom left, capacity is key. The reason capacity is key is that it's the one thing that will actually prevent the really bad occurrence. And learning obviously is key to the actual HOP process. And the reason they're going to be our principles, they're the draft principles, they might look a little bit different, is we didn't need all of the HOP principles. Some of the stuff about the people, the culture, the bits about respect, that's in our DNA already. The bit we need to do is this socio-technical bit and make sure that we join up the people and the kit that we're using. So my final slide, just to finish, and sorry, I've taken a bit of time over the top, but to get some questions, this is my conclusion. So, you know, they're the HOP principles. HOP isn't an initiative or a program. It's definitely not a silver bullet. It's about getting some really good principles, embedding them into your culture, and making it the way that you guys work going forward. HOP is a philosophy, and it's all about capacity and learning. It really is. It's a major effort. So some of the companies we talked to have been on the HOP journey for 7, 8, 9 years. We think we're going to take at least 3 years from now to really start to get it in. We're not going to make it a big initiative. We're not even going to announce HOP. We're going to introduce it through our tools and processes and change the way we train, change the way we think, change the way we investigate to get to the HOP principles that we want. But we're not going to make a big bang about this. This isn't going to be lots of communications and posters and flyers. We're going to change our culture slowly. We're going to alter the course of the ship slowly, and we'll get round to it. We also know that if you get it right, HOP encompasses everybody, it engages everyone, and it will drive cultural change. Culture takes ages to change, but it will do it. Is it the only thing that I think works? No, but I'm really pleased that we've now got this as part of our toolbox. It is something that we as an organization can see a lot of benefit from. So I hope I've managed to cover the topic in enough detail. There will be additional slides and notes for you to look at. And I would recommend that you now go and take a look at your organization first, be comfortable where you are, and then go a look and see if HOP is going to be any good to you or if parts of it are going to be good to you. So on that, Susan, I'll hand back to Mohit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Susan, if you can like check out the questions if you have in the our chat box.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Norman, for a very informative presentation. So we've got a couple of questions. So the first question is what is the difference between a hazard and risk? When someone's working at height over the scaffold, what will be the risk and hazard?
Okay, well, the basic difference for me in terms of hazard and risk, and unfortunately, and I'm as guilty as anybody, I interchange the words, but hazard really is anything with the potential to cause harm. So that person at height, if he falls, is going to hurt himself. Working at height means there's the hazard of him falling, and we try and prevent that. We try and stop that happening, or we avoid working at height. The other hazard could be that he could drop an object and it will hit somebody on the head and cause a fatal accident or, you know, damage. So the hazard is anything with the potential to cause harm, and it could be environmental things, it could be process, it could be equipment, it can be energy. Hazards are things that can cause harm. Risk, however, has got 2 components. For me, risk is the chance, the likelihood or the probability that that hazard is going to cause some damage. And if it does cause some damage or harm or loss, the extent or consequences that happen. So if I drop an object from that working at height and it just hits the ground, the consequences are nobody's got hurt, there's been a high potential near miss, but the chances are if somebody was walking under there, the area hadn't been barriered correctly, somebody could be struck and we could have a very serious or fatal accident. So hazard is anything that can cause harm. Risk is the chance that that harm will actually happen. And if it does happen, the level of the consequences. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So the next question, Norman, is how can we manage HSC management system with less resources?
I think that's an absolutely excellent question. Um, Personally, I think some management systems are far too big and complex because every time we have an issue, we build another procedure, we build another bit into a procedure. And I also think that one of the problems with management systems now is they're still in library mode. They're still thinking of the folders and the documents I had on my desk way back in the 1970s. And I think the way that management systems and where we're beginning to move is that we're looking at far more dynamic management systems, and even the way we're presenting the materials, much more graphics, much more flowcharts, much more process maps, lots more explanation of the how and the why as opposed to the what. And you're absolutely right. We used to have 8 people managing, just looking after our documentation, and now we're down to 2. And in the old days, we would have tried to find another 6 document controllers, management system people. And what we're actually under at the moment is changing the management system. And it's also to reflect the new audience. I had to learn all my knowledge in the early days to pass exams, and people had to learn things by rote. Now people want ready access information. They want to get pointed to the information that's key to extra guidance. And so I think this question is probably a subject for a presentation by somebody, but it's a very, very, very good question. I think we need to change the management systems as opposed to getting more resources to manage them. I don't know if that answers the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is no further questions. If anybody wants to ask any questions, you can also email us at training@iirsm.org, and we can happily pass it on to Norma, which has agreed. We'll be happy to answer it after the presentation has ended. Sorry, the meeting has ended. So if there's any more questions, please make it come through, and I'll just pass it on to Mohit, just so he can just end the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Susan, for attending the questions. And thank you, Norman, sir. Like, it was like great presentation, and it was a very informative webinar. And it is always good gaining insight in such emerging topics. Is like very essential for us, and definitely in future, it's going to play a very vital role. So thank you for providing a unique perspective over the agenda, over the topic. And again, I thank you for taking out time and being available as the speaker for IISM India branch. And I hope, like I did, all the branch member of our IISM, they would have enjoyed the session. And any question, something would be there, definitely we'll reach out to you. So thank you once again.
No, that's no problem at all, Mohit. And as I said, pass anything on. If anybody wants to have a discussion, if anybody is thinking of using HOP and they just want to have a chat, or they want materials or anything, absolutely open to share anything that we can learn.
That's definitely. Yes, Susan, we can wind up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Norman, and thank you, Mohit, for supporting us in this webinar. So the webinar will now end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.